Talk about Arizona and what we do. In 1984, when I was in the legislature, we passed a bill called the Groundwater Protection Act. And the purpose of that bill was to protect our groundwater quality in Arizona. And the reason it was is because companies like Motorola and others, if you'll remember, were dumping chemicals into dry wells, and it was getting into our groundwater. And we were very concerned about that. We were also very concerned about the applications of pesticides. And so we were the first state in the nation to actually do this. And we require strict reporting on all the pesticides that are used by farmers in the state of Arizona. They report all applications to our department, and we track that. So that if for some reason a pesticide does show up in a groundwater, we can pinpoint and know exactly the source that it came from. There's a form called the 1080 form that's filed with our department, and we track that information. Now, the use of pesticides, herbicides, has gone down with the advent of the GMOs.
Fine.
Good.
That's not true. That it couldn't be further from the truth, actually.
Well,
That last statement.
Okay. Okay, next question. Is there a difference between GMOs and hybridization? Let's see, you started the last one, so we'll start with you.
Yes, there is a large difference between GMOs. So biotech would like us to believe that the process by which they insert genes from non-related, different kingdom organisms into the plants that we consume is no different than traditional breeding practices used by farmers for hundreds of years. And we all learned this in Biology 101, right, with the Punnett square and the A, lowercase a. Okay, we all learned about that. That is genetic engineering, right? But that's a very broad term because they've been doing that for hundreds of years. This, the FDA, when they were evaluating GMOs, their own in-house scientists showed that the process isn't even close to being the same. A memo from an FDA official who protested the agency was trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, trying to force an ultimate conclusion that there is no difference between foods modified by genetic engineering and foods modified by traditional breeding practices. She declared the processes of genetic engineering and traditional breeding are different, and according to the technical experts in the agency, they lead to different risks. These are the FDA own in-house scientists that were ignored when the FDA went ahead and broke the law to approve GMOs in 1992.
There is a difference between advanced crossbreeding and hybridization and GMO plant breeding. And as you indicated, they divide cells at the molecular stage in order to create the GMOs. All of these have been very important to the advancement of agriculture, but most importantly, there has not been one study that has shown that GMOs are responsible for any increase of cancer, any increase of death or mortality around the world. There was a study just recently reviewed by a bunch of Nobel laureates that indicated that that was the case. In fact, there was an article in the Christian Science Monitor that said the concern about the GMOs was unwarranted, based on science. And so, to a large degree, we're going to disagree on that. Now, but
That's the point of the debate.
I'm going to convert her to donuts before we're through here. But anyway, now, but let me, if you'll just give me a little bit of time, I want to talk to you about why modifying genes is so important, not only in traditional crossbreeding and hybridization, but also with the GMOs. Agriculture, in order for it to meet the needs of a growing population, needs to advance. And by advancing, we're able to improve the genetics, particularly in animals, and I'll give you experience with our cattle. We raise registered Angus cattle. There are certain genes that we focus in on. Anybody here like to eat tough steak? It's the worst thing in the world. And over the years, we have been able to, through DNA testing, isolate the genes that deal with tenderness, with the marbling of the beef, the size of the ribeye. And so when I go and buy a bull to be my herd sire in my herd, I get a full DNA panel on that bull. I know exactly what I'm looking for. And for us, and for what we're breeding for, is we're breeding for what we call the tabletop meat, the restaurant type. The type that the typical housewife, husband, when they go and buy beef, it's gonna be tender, it's gonna be flavorful, and it meets your expectations. And through the breeding that we've done, we have been able to do that. In fact, we just had some steers killed here the other day in Los Angeles at the Packer. And they all rated choice and prime. And that was done because of how we changed our breeding within our Angus herd.
Rebuttal?
Okay, so,
The original question was comparing the
Difference
process,
between
difference
GMOs
between
and
GMOs and traditional breeding.
Hybridization.
So I have, smart conventional breeding shows much more promise than genetic engineering and approaches and is attracting more investment. Importantly, smart breeding is already delivering drought, salinity, and flood tolerance traits to several countries to help farmers cope with the impacts of climate stress. So that idea that we need genetic engineering in the lab to feed the world and so that we can meet the demands of people eating is just not true. And he mentioned also that there hasn't been any scientific studies to prove that it's tied to cancer. Dr. Seralini conducted a study using rats that was, he replicated the exact study that Monsanto, the company that created the GM soy food, he found tumors in rats after 4 to 7 months. The Monsanto study stopped at 90 days. So the tumors showed up at 4 months just after their study. A 90-day feeding study to prove that this is safe for us to feed to our kids? I don't think so. He did this in a 2-year study and he found serious problems. Cancerous tumors the size of a golf ball in rats. He found liver failure, kidney failure, immune problems.
Time.
No, keep going,
Oh,
let her
okay.
go, let her go.
Okay,
All right.
Emmanuel, I'll give you a rebuttal chance.
We only get the room for so long.
Okay, so and Seralini was.
You're all right, you're doing good.
Okay, Seralini was smeared by biotech industry, by magazines for years. He fought back to try to he was fired, he was gagged immediately after his study was published in The Lancet. It was a very prestigious journal. They don't publish crap. And he was gagged and he was fired, and just this year he won a fraud case against one of those institutions, and he won a defamation case in court. So he was right. He to the T replicated Monsanto's own feeding study on rats. Also, there's a problem with BT corn. He worked with a farmer that's been feeding the first introduction of BT corn to his herd of cattle, and they had a lot of problems, and they were able to prove that it was the BT corn.
Rebuttal?
We feed GMO corn to our cattle and they do just fine. We've not had any problems. In fact, they gain faster. Man, they look really good too. So what I want to,
corn is not the natural diet of cows anyways.
sure it is. It's,
I've never heard of cows grazing on corn.
well, I need to take you to the farm, okay, all right?
Make sure it's long after you've sprayed anything.
No, we don't spray it. I think Sir Richard Roberts, who is an English biochemist and a molecular biologist and a Nobel laureate, was one of the signatories on this study about GMOs. And he said this, which I thought was very interesting. He said, since there is now no reason to think anyone would be sorry when the technology is proven to be at least as safe, if not safer, than traditional plant breeding, this argument is meaningless. Furthermore, the history of innovation has always involved some risk. We would have many fewer road accidents if we had stuck to the horse and carriage transportation instead of developing cars. Now, a Nobel laureate, a scientist, an expert in science who studied this, says there's not a problem. Now, I eat GMO corn. I think I'm pretty healthy. All the sweet corn I eat is GMO. Cornmeal comes from GMO corn. I'm just looking at all of these plants here. Our cotton is GMO, soybeans, canola, alfalfa, sugar beets, papaya, squash, potatoes, and apples are soon to be put on the list. And again, folks, I'm just gonna tell you that there's not a single study that proves any connection between genetically modified plants and cancers in human beings or problems with animals. We've been feeding this stuff for over 20 years. 20 years. And yet, the quality of our beef has increased. Our production has increased. The efficiency of our animals increased. And I respectfully disagree. And I don't question your credentials, because they're much better than mine. Much better than mine. I'm
That's
just kind of an old farmer type kid. And I'm around this stuff all the time. And folks, I want you to know that farmers don't wake up every day thinking who they're gonna poison, okay?
Agreed.
They don't do that. They're very sensitive to all of these issues. And so, to a large degree, as with all science, it evolves over time. And I can guarantee you that those of us in the farming community want to make sure that the products that we grow and the things that we do are beneficial to not only people, but animals. And I'll take the word of this Nobel laureate in exchange for giving you a donut on your other folks.
We have 30 seconds.
Yes, please give her 30 seconds.
Yes.
Give her a minute.
Mr. Killian is attempting a logical fallacy argument, which is an appeal to credential. Nobel laureates are, they're pretty credible, right? And actually, that's what's been happening throughout this whole thing of GMOs being brought into the food system. Of course, it wasn't every scientist thinking, hey, we're going to make a bunch of money and poison people. Of course. Actually, the biggest thing that has been happening is because people have been appealing to credentials. They're like, oh, so-and-so says they're safe, so they must be safe. And then that person passes it on and says, oh, well, so-and-so said it was safe, and he's got all these credentials, so it must be safe. But the truth is, and Mr. Killian said that there hasn't been one single study that has connected GMOs to adverse health effects, and that is a lie. Over 2,200 studies, this was 2 years ago, there's probably more than 4,000 studies now that have shown with data, not credentials, that they either are not safe or they've never been proven to be safe.
Okay. Next question. You're the one.
Okay.
Your turn for the next one. Is the use of radiation in organic crops, also known as mutagenesis, safer than transgenic technology used in GMOs?
That I do not know. I'm not familiar with any of those studies. Are you?
Ditto.
So I answer that. Sorry.
We'll
It's a
skip
new
that
one.
question
Will you
then.
send me that? I'm gonna do some
Yeah.
research.
Okay,
Know about that.
we'll send you that. And I'd also like to state for the audience that if you folks have any literature that you'd like to post on our Facebook page, we're going to welcome both of you to do that so that you can further study any things that you want a little more depth on. The next question, since we'll skip that one, so you guys knew when you were taking your extra time that you were going to eliminate one. No. Okay. Can GMOs really be used to lower cost and increase yields? And what do you expect to see from farmers for the future of American
American cotton?
crops?
Crops, okay.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let me go back to some statistics. And that is, again, the American farmer's going to have to double their production between now and 2050. And the reason we have to do that is because of the population increase. And the organics, the traditional growing, the GMOs, all of that's going to play a role in how we produce food for the people of the world. But more importantly, there are technologies on the horizon that we are not even familiar with yet that are being developed at the universities that are going to help us meet that demand. And so my concern is I don't want to take things off the table that keep us from our ability to feed the world. Now, just a couple things. When you go in the typical grocery store today, there's 40,000 different products in a grocery store. The American society has the cheapest food in the world. Europe, 25% of their income goes to food, ours is 10%, which is a good thing. Not only do we produce enough for the people in America, but we produce food for people around the world. There are people in this world that are starving to death, that need to be fed. And we need to do everything we can, and I see it as a moral imperative, to tell you the truth, that America's most important strategic industry is agriculture. You can't eat tanks, you can't eat computers, you can't eat computer chips. And to me, it's a sin, first of all, that anyone in America would go to bed hungry at night. And secondly, that anyone in the world would go to bed hungry because for some political reason or whatever else, we can't get food to those people. And so you want to spread, now I'm getting my political soapbox, you want to spread liberty and freedom around the world, you do it with food. And you teach people how to grow food.
Time.
And I'm just going to take a little more. Sorry. I'm not going to give her a half hour.
I think they took a lesson from my playbook.
But it's incredibly important that we help people feed themselves and get the technology so they can do that. In those areas where you see the high terrorism and violence and struggling, it's because they can't feed themselves. And when a person's belly is empty and they can't feed their children, they don't worry about freedom of the press or freedom of religion or any of those freedoms that we have. They're just worried about making it from day to day, and they will do anything to get food for their families. So here we sit in America, the most prosperous agriculture country in the world, and we need to do a better job of getting that food out around the world. And I think to a large degree we're trying to do that in agriculture. Now, one last point. I heard Secretary Vilsack talk about this the other day. I was in a meeting with him.